Hey, Donald. Hey, Dana, Dave. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Oh, oh, no problem. Happy to have you. So we certainly hope this is a benefit to you. So we're going to start. I'll give you all some background as to who we are and what we've been doing, and hopefully how this can be of benefit to you. So, um, so my name is Nuno Puto. I'm one of the coordinators of the meetup. Although I'm a principal in Optimal Campus Consulting, we never try to sell anything. The reason for Higher Ed Pros is to help the community of CIOs and other higher tech, excuse me, higher ed technology professions. So our intent is to bring people together around specific topics that are of interest. If there's anything that we can do to connect you to someone else, whether they're part of a meetup meeting or not, someone that's been doing something that you're doing, we're happy to do that. If you have interest in a particular topic, maybe it's something that you're doing, maybe it's something that you're about to do, and you'd like us to organize a group around that topic so you can get their perspectives, again, we're happy to try to help. We've been doing we've been doing meetups now for about 4 years, at least, I would say 4 to 5 years. But over the past year and a half, we've been doing them through Zoom, which certainly has made it easier for people to join. And we get people from all over the country. We get people from Canada, and occasionally we get people internationally. So um, with with that, I think I'm going to I'm going to let Tom provide some of the logistics, and then I'll make some introductions.
Sure. So my name's Tom Goldrick, and I'm an organizer with the group. Just quickly, we can go over some logistics. We don't have a lot of folks on the call, so I think we won't really need to worry too much about muting and unmuting. I believe folks can actually unmute themselves at this point, and either way, let me make sure they can. So there we go. So the normal format for our discussions are fairly informal. We usually get folks on the call to discuss whatever the topic may be. And if you're interested, you want to chime in, feel free to unmute yourself and join the discussion. We normally will be looking at chat, but given the size of the group, I think we can just jump in if you have anything interesting to say or any questions you may have. And just so you all know, we are recording the meeting, and then also afterwards, we'll be sending out a link to that recording to all of the attendees and other meetup members as well. And in addition to that video, we'll also be sending out a questionnaire where you can let us know not only how we did, but also how we can improve some of the topics you may be interested in talking about at an upcoming meetup, and other items that we may have come up during the conversation. So with that, I'll pass it back to Nuno, who can introduce our moderator as well as some guest speakers on the call today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tom. So as you know, the topic for today is really around what's been happening over the last year, which has been pretty crazy, and what might the future hold and what people are doing. And we're getting the perspective of not just technology folks, but we're also getting the perspective of Dr. Amy Zhang and Dr. Stacy Sweeney, um, and James Stoffel, who is also he's one of the panelists. So James is the technology director and data security officer at Showa Boston Institute, an institute also of higher learning. He will be moderating, and Dr. Sweeney is the interim vice president of academic administration at Bay Path University. Dr. Zhang is the dean and professor at Sawyer Business School at Suffolk University. So looking forward to getting your perspectives, ideas, and forecasts. I think, James, take it away.
All right. Great. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Again, my name is James Stoffel. So this particular question, when I found out, what the topic was going to be, I was kind of interested, more so because our institution located in Boston, even though we're on a nice little 40-acre plot, we're very relatively small in size as an institution. We're more of an ESL college than anything else. But at the same time, we're just as impacted as any other college. Students are not on campus, they are doing online. and the dynamics of how to present the technology, especially with faculty that may know enough about technology to make them dangerous, but maybe not enough to present the material properly when they've been more so for 5, 6, 10, 15 years, been doing it in person and can get the student engaged versus trying to get them engaged online. I know from our perspective, the biggest hurdle was like bandwidth. That was huge. That was one of our major issues. I guess with that particular topic, I guess I will offer, I'm going to ask that first question to you, Dr. Zhang. What was, when this whole dilemma hit your institution, what was the biggest hurdle that you had to overcome?
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me to join this conversation. It's a great question, a very big question as well. I would say two big words to describe the hurdle. One is change, the other is communication. In broad sense, I'm sure you echo those two. And for me in particular, there's an additional complexity or layer of complexity for me because I started my current position 10 months ago. By the way, today is the beginning of my 11 months as the Dean of the Sawyer Business School at Suffolk University in Boston. So I started during the pandemic. And so you can imagine it's even more difficult for me to make necessary changes and also to communicate with faculty and staff. And so in terms of change, I think the current hurdle I'm still dealing with, I have been dealing with since I joined, has to do with declined resources and budget cut due to decline in enrollment, right? So this actually leads to many changes that have to be made in terms of, for example, faculty size, program portfolio, and others. And you can imagine how difficult it is for me to make those changes when I don't even know my faculty that well yet. I've met only a few faculty members in person so far, but I conducted over, I would say, 2,000 Zoom meetings since I started my deanship. But when you meet people on the screen, you don't really know them that well. You know what they look like, but you don't know what kind of people they are. But anyway, so making changes during the pandemic definitely is a big hurdle. And of course, faculty 15 months ago needed to pivot quickly, moving everything to an online environment. Fortunately, I have to say, business school professors are more comfortable and proficient in teaching online. I heard a lot of complaints and also just various whinings from College of Arts and Sciences or professors in other disciplines, right? I experienced both at my prior places, at Suffolk and then also at the University of Hartford. But business school professors were pretty smooth and pretty swift switching to an online education. So communication definitely is another big hurdle because in a virtual environment, also as a new leader, how would I establish my trust before I ask people to do all kinds of additional tasks, right? And also how can I convince them the changes are needed? To some degree, the pandemic has been helpful. You can always use pandemic as one strong compelling reason to make changes. On the other hand, people are still people. They need to understand why and the rationale for those changes. I don't know how much detail I need to go to, but these two are the biggest hurdles at the strategic level. At the operational level, I want to say in terms of teaching, there are more policies needed to facilitate or to ensure online teaching will be smooth. For example, camera policy, recording policy, privacy policy, pass and fail grading policy. We didn't need those before pandemic, but with online teaching, we had to develop those policies. Sometimes we were able to be proactive. sometimes we have to change the policy along the way when we try to implement. So operationally, I think there are more hurdles to ensure online teaching. So those are some of the ideas I'd like to share with you. And of course, I can elaborate as we continue.
Great, thank you. I'd like to ask the same question of you, Dr. Sweeney. What was the biggest hurdle that you had to face entering this pandemic?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Dr. Zeng, we're living parallel lives. I too started July 1st of last year with Bay Path University. So let me, and I'll give you a little background. This is quite something. So I walked into a situation where I was called by the retiring president. Carol Leary had been president for 25 years at Bay Path, and she retired last year, right when the pandemic hit. And then, so there's a new president at Bay Path, President Sandy Doran. And so we not only had, and then the provost stepped down because she'd been there for 10 years and decided to step down into a department chair role. So you had new president, new head of academics, and a pandemic. And I remember Carol Leary said to me before I started, Stacey, you're going to have some landmines, watch out. So I think when I look at the biggest hurdle really has been what Dr. Zeng had mentioned. I think it really, it almost has been like that, the mental and emotional shift. Bay Path University is about 3,500 students in an all-women's undergraduate college that does have an on-ground campus and the American Women's College, which is all online, and a very robust co-ed graduate program. So as the pandemic hit, the pivot was actually fairly, I don't want to say seamless, but it wasn't as difficult as most institutions because the American Women's College was quite well put together over the last 7 years, policies, procedures, terrific, grant funding over the years as far as recognition of the good work in student retention, et cetera. So what we do still have is that hurdle of the traditional on-ground faculty and making that shift to becoming one with the online, one with the American Women's College. There has been a sort of a feeling that the American Women's College perhaps isn't as much quality, perhaps, or isn't as much isn't as robust as the on-ground, as the in-person experience. And I think that also the idea that there is a sort of a curriculum that's put together already, even syllabi as far as the online women's college. So I think in many instances, we've been dealing with the emotional impact, the impact of saying, please, let's pivot, please use the online coursework, please use the online format as much as you can, which is a 6-week model. And really we had a huge shift. We had a huge shift of moving courses quickly last summer, fall into that model. And I think, frankly, from a lot of perspectives, it went very well. But I think from the perspective of the traditional faculty, the pandemic has accelerated what I think is frankly, we can talk more about this as we go on this afternoon, is really about accelerating what is the long-term plan of what is to be. And that is the change in the model of traditional higher ed in the undergrad program. So the traditional faculty, they've sort of had an inkling of that. Of course, they've talked about it somewhat, but this has really brought it on, and in a much more real, as far as the real aspect of looking at what they're living. They had some pivoted nicely and worked closely with the online folks. Others did not. And I think that, and so therefore their coursework had to be created, turned into an online format for them, which you can imagine wasn't very popular with faculty. So I think that this really has been the crux of it. I think that we've done a lot of work as far as, I'll call it kind of a healing situation over the past year with the faculty, because ultimately we do know that this model is going to change, and it already is changing. And I think this has made us ask ourselves questions about everything from how many buildings we have, the brick and mortar, to the athletic program, to all the things that you have to question. Is this really important to our students anymore, and to their, to the adult learner, to the undergrad student and their family, their parents? And they're making these decisions, of course, saying to us that the online piece is really something that is going to continue to grow as far as our population, and the hybrid model that we've moved into is really something that's been very critical for us in overcoming those hurdles. So that piece, and one more piece, and this is really for I think perhaps for anyone who has health studies, health science programs, healthcare programs, field work. We were really hit pretty hard with trying to find students fieldwork to graduate on time. This was a real challenge. So that one, that really is that far-reaching impact that's what the pandemic had on us, in that respect. So I do think that is really, we've had to get creative with that as far as how do we help students to stay on track to graduate, a world that they aren't able to even go out and do the field work. So those are the two main challenges. And I'll stop there, and we can sort of elaborate on some of these pieces as we go along.
So I guess my next question would be, so in implementing this change, so to speak, obviously staffing as well as administration got together to try to come up with solutions, so to speak, in the midst of the unknowns. So for us, our college we already had an implemented LMS. Coincidentally, our college uses Moodle. Most of the staff were used to using Moodle as a form of teaching tool. The concept of relying it solely through a web browser versus being on, say, a projector screen and the teacher standing in front of it was a different concept. So for us, it was a matter of trying to get additional training and staff and faculty themselves to get together to talk amongst themselves on how they would best utilize it. Those that were successful and those that were nervous, they talked amongst themselves. However, there were some aspects of even using Zoom as a tool that wasn't going to work at the time. We thought it would work, and it didn't necessarily work. So I'm just kind of curious, and I'll start with you, Dr. Sweeney. Was there anything that the faculty and for, say, technology, like two groups of people thinking, okay, we think this is going to work. Yeah, we do too. And then it was like, it just fell on its face. Was there anything like that you learned?
Right. Yes, I think that it was the trying to keep students engaged in a world of with faculty who perhaps just thought that they could continue just the lecture piece. That they were continuing to do what they did on ground, online and on Zoom, which students pretty much let us know pretty quickly that wasn't going to. They weren't going to stay very engaged throughout the whole academic year with that. So I think that this is where it became important for the faculty, the on-ground traditional faculty, to be able to engage much more with our online faculty and our instructional designers. And that was something that was very new to them in regard to making it a more, whether it's talking about creating videos, talking about having a much more, interesting type of discussion groups back and forth. I think there were a lot of different areas that were, that had to change as far as how you deliver the content. And I think that in itself was a, we'd heard stories of some faculty members that would come on and just for a few minutes, and then they would just give out assignments, and then they wouldn't even have the Zoom meetups as well. So it was really interesting to find out, what some of the faculty members were doing. I do think that the help again of having the online component already in place and having some really well-versed instructional designers has helped the on-ground faculty. But I think at first it was very scary for many of them. And I think that when you thought, how hard could it be to use Zoom? How difficult should that be for folks? But but it was at first, because we realized how many people had never used Zoom. And of course, the training that had to occur, the training that was put together, we realized pretty quickly we have to do Zoom training, and we have to help our faculty who aren't used to delivering online content understand what would be more engaging as far as helping those students and helping those faculty members. So we ended up having, frankly, some quick, I know the word pivot, some quick trainings put together. We ended up having our faculty, traditional faculty, go through the typical online faculty training and onboarding. So although that was fairly easy to as far as how to facilitate that, but I do think there was some resistance at first, saying, well, do you really have to teach me how to do this? Yes, we do. And so I think it was surprising to some faculty that they really weren't as well received on Zoom and doing online content delivery as they were in the classroom. But I think I want to say we got through it fairly well, and some have actually embraced it quite well.
So what about you, Dr. Zhang, especially as you mentioned, having some difficulty in actually meeting some of your staff and only doing it virtually? What were any, I would say, hurdles or what would be something that you all thought would have worked, but when something just changed and you had to, like you said, you had to change quickly in stride?
So I will talk about the teaching side first. Similar to what BayPath has been doing, we have a very excellent center called Center for Teaching and Scholarship Excellence that has provided continuous training all the way from the very beginning, even to now, to help faculty learn and also adapt to the online teaching environment. And 2 months ago, I also hosted a forum for this faculty at Sawyer Business School to exchange their ideas, because two components of teaching, especially at our curriculum, one is experiential learning and the other is student engagement, are impacted very heavily by a virtual environment, right? How would you engage students and how to implement experiential learning or hands-on experience in a virtual environment? And I was so impressed with our faculty's inputs. That forum was made available to only the Sawyer Business School, but over 100 people attended and 25 faculty presented their ideas. Eventually, I was able to give 15 awards to those faculty that presented excellent ideas. I was very impressed. I have to say, a lot of business school faculty are pretty tech savvy, and they mentioned all kinds of great ideas to engage students and also to implement hands-on activities in a virtual environment. So I think that's the positive side from a teaching perspective. And James, you asked me about my hurdle. How would I deal with the communication with faculty and staff? Well, I try to create more meeting opportunities or conversational opportunities with faculty and staff. For example, we have monthly faculty assembly where I always try to provide updates to the entire faculty so that they are aware of what's been going on at the school. And I also host wine and wine sessions on Friday afternoons to invite faculty to join me just to chat socially and so that they can know me and I can know them better. So that's why I also have made myself available to attend many meetings, right? Even though I am extremely Zoom fatigue, I have the high degree of Zoom fatigue. But I know it's important for me to get to know the campus, get to know the culture, get to know the people. And the only way I can do that is to mix myself for those meetings. So I attended a lot of department meetings. I attended a lot of committee meetings. And also I attended a lot of on-campus meetings. I know it was pretty time consuming, but I think it has really helped because I heard a lot of positive feedback from my faculty and staff saying that we feel you are part of the team and we're so happy to have you as our leader. So I think my effort is paid off, and I would love to continue doing that as my second year continues.
Okay. I'm going to stop for 1 second because we have an interesting question that was asked by Dana. And he asked the following. As a higher IT organization signals a potential hybrid work policy with some on-site work, they've noticed an increased turnover of developers who want to remain working, and that is working remotely versus having to actually come back onto campus. And that's an interesting question. So for us, as a small institution, I have actually had one of my staff in the technology realm already say, do I need to go back to work since I can do everything remotely? In lieu of a fire burning down the server, yeah, he can do pretty much 99.99% of the work at home. So it's very tough to argue that, and then at the same time present the question to the president. Of course, he then says, well, then we can just reuse that office space. But then that brings other interesting questions. Well, you know, it's brick and mortar, Dr. Sweeney said. So how much of that do we need to just actually release and then either possibly create a general increased revenue and rent that space back out again? We ended up doing that for classrooms to a multitude of different entities within JP to try to generate something. And I'd be curious, not necessarily, it's a great question, but I guess I'll twist it a little bit and say, are either one of you, and I'll bounce this question back to you, Dr. Zhang, have you had any issues where some of your support team for the faculty and for your LMS say, okay, it's supposed to be back to the norm, but we still like working remote, and we want to see if there's a change in policy, whether it's the technology support people or even faculty that say, hey, you know, I love teaching at home. I don't think I need to do this in the classroom.
Definitely there are requests from faculty that have found it actually enjoyable teaching or also flexible teaching at home. For example, for the fall semester, currently we are planning to be back, right? And all the courses actually have been scheduled in a traditional way or pre-pandemic. But I received several faculty's requests saying that these are international faculty members, especially. They are at their current home country, and they actually enjoy teaching classes online, and they are wondering if they could continue doing that in the fall semester. Also, international students, for example, cannot come back to campus, right, in the fall for various reasons. How can we accommodate them so that we can ensure they can graduate on time, as Dr. Sweeney mentioned, right? How can we make sure students can graduate? How can we make sure they can graduate on time? So how to accommodate international students? So definitely some online options or some sections, online sections of courses need to be made available. From the staff side, our current decision is for high student interaction positions, right? If they need to interact with students, especially in, for example, in student advising, counseling, career services, and others, they would be expected to come back. But for others that can finish or complete some of their tasks at home or remotely, we try to be flexible. Again, HR actually plays a very large role in this process because they need to look at accommodation policy and also handle everyone's request on a case-by-case situation, a case-by-case basis. So that's a situation where we are now, and because we are still watching the condition, the situation, right? And we try to be as quick as possible in responding to the state, the city's policies, as well as faculty and staff's requests.
James, could I mention a couple of things?
Yeah, please, by all means.
Sure. Yeah, I'm doing some work right now with a couple of large Boston area universities, and both of them have not just gotten the requests, but are planning to allow, where possible, and in this case, the majority of their staff to work from home, if that's what they want to do. One of them especially has very, very powerful collaboration technologies in place, and honestly, people have been I would say, even more productive than they would have been in the office. Given fewer water cooler types of conversations. But fewer water cooler conversations also are not necessarily a good thing. There's something to be gained about water cooler conversations. But in this same case, they're able to reduce their rental space and the corresponding, rental payments by millions of dollars per year. This is a very large university, and they're going more into hoteling. Just had a conversation with a CIO the other day, and he reiterated that's the plan. That's the plan ongoing, going forward. So I think it was it Dana that asked the question. So
yeah,
hopefully that answers. That also addresses a little bit.
Before I bounce to you, Dr. Sweeney, yeah, we've actually, again, into that office space for my staff. It's just a small office, but it was just something for the teachers if they wanted to come in and sit down with him and get training on technology. But we found that other departments, the same thing, like finance, some of those people can do the finance because things are in the cloud. So we're like, well, we could just take those same office space and just do hoteling. And the question then is, premier office space, can we just turn around and now reutilize that as a classroom and then rent that space out? So we're trying to see if there's any ways for repurposing. So it's kind of interesting. I will say, as a side note, in Boston, I am hearing on a non-educational side, some of the financial institutions that have rented large spaces in Boston, like International Place and 225 Franklin, et cetera, their landlords are looking at issues where the lease doesn't want to be renewed. And so they're looking at maybe these like floors at like 29, 30, 32, they convert those to apartments and/or condos, and just generate money there, because they'll make more money actually in condos, because people want to live, somewhere like that. So it's just the whole thing just creates a whole new view of how you see business in every aspect, whether it's billing, electronics, rental, etc. But with that, I'll ask you, Dr. Sweeney, how does that affect you with those requests, whether from a technology standpoint or staffing?
Sure. Yeah. And so timely. So it's a juicy question, right? As we're all facing this. We actually we conducted a survey of all of our employees to say, what do you want to do? Which maybe that's a little risky, but of course, this answer came back. Of course, they want to be remote. Many of them. To Dr. Zhang's point, I think it is that student-facing piece you have to be mindful of. So what we're looking at really is, and I'll kind of echo what you've all said. We have found, of course, people have been more productive at home. I think there was always this other idea that they wouldn't be more productive at home, but they have been. I think because of all the things that have been, the flexibility pieces of it. So I think there's a couple things here. I think that there is that concern, first of all, as everyone is shifting and changing. I was talking to a dear friend and colleague last night who is in the midst of actually changing jobs, and she's fairly high level in higher education, because the new position they're allowing her to work remotely, and it was quite a surprise as far as this position that they're allowing her to do so. So I think that we have to understand too, we might be losing good people if we're not flexible and open as far as our current employees. And I think we also have to think about how do we support that idea, and how do we support that while still, of course, serving our students or our clients, et cetera. I think what we've been looking at is the idea of having coverage. If you have a student-facing area, student life, as we talk about we have our advising, et cetera, for our traditional on-the-ground students. Can they, of course, share? Can they split up the schedule? A few people are here one day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The others are here Tuesday, Thursday. And as we do that, I think the other piece of it really is, how do we still maintain the culture of our organization? And I think that in itself, where we could look at, as we work remotely, we kind of pilot this next year. We sort of see how does it go, and then we say to ourselves, okay, we can probably either give up space, or if we're leasing, we can, if we own our space, we can use it for other revenue generating ideas. But there is that component of, how do we still figure out how to bring our people together physically at least a few times a year, or in some regular basis besides Zoom, to be able to have those exchanges. I said because more recently, Bay Path, as many of us, of course, are vaccinated, and I know Dr. Zhang was saying, I've been sort of in that Zoom fatigue as well, especially on commencement. We had virtual commencement, and I didn't know Bay Path has so many little mini commencement events. So I found myself for 2 weeks straight on Zoom from early morning till 9 o'clock in the evening, because there was a pinning ceremony, this or that. So I think that those pieces we have to think about is really, how do we still bring people together physically? And so more recently, we've been having some meals together. We've been having some interactions together. Today, we actually had a strategic planning meeting all day today in person. So those are the things that I think that you want to think about as you shift and change, which I think is critical, because you want to hang on to your good people while still servicing your clients and students. But how do you sort of maintain that culture as well?
All right, so that's so I think that brings into a different question topic. I'm going to change gear a little bit. So in regards to the remote requests from our employees and our staff and faculty, there is obviously at the administration level expectations of outcomes. But again, the widget here is our students, the grades, what we're trying to provide to them. So I guess the curiosity is, what are we looking at then after this past year going forward? What is the staffing, faculty outcomes that they're expecting, as well as what administration is, as well as what with technology? So I'll give you an example. For us, it's still an issue of that online presence, because some students will be still online versus coming to campus because they are outside the country. We're facing the same thing. The dilemma to that, which is an outcome that we're trying to improve on, is that through the past year, some students just felt that online classes wasn't important. They felt, yeah, they do the homework, but their grades slipped because they were still missing out on something, and it's still trying to get that engagement from those students. So the expectation was from the faculty and staff is like, we'd only have maybe a small percentage of students that would falter on the transition of going into online classes, when the reality was it was a double-digit dip in both attendance and in grades. So going forward, right now, we're doing the same thing. There's strategic plans on what can improve, and technology is being pulled into the discussion because we're wondering how we can improve that. Is there any plugins? Is there any other type of tools? Faculty are going, they're in Zoom fatigue as well, but they're attending all these different remote learning sessions to bring in more ideas to improve the outcome, because there was an expectation and it just wasn't met. So I'm curious, I guess I'll ask the question of you, Dr. Sweeney. With that said, especially when you have this poll that you sent, the survey for home, I mean, obviously your response is going to be, okay, that's fine, you can still work from home, but there's going to be an expectation of A, B, and C. So how are you handling that, both at a student level and staff, faculty?
I think that that's a great question. I think that the idea of continuing, of course, having a very robust assessment, plan in place, assessment activity in place at your institution, organization, that you are always looking at the outcomes, because if there's any slippage there, if there's anything that we're seeing that's not, what it should be, then we need to address right away. I think that we, of course, at Bay Path, we have our, our institutional research departments as far as looking at, let me say, I didn't mention this yet, but looking at data is critical. Data analytics is critical. And we haven't even talked about that yet. So I think one of the things this has done for us is we have been looking at our retention rates, looking at our graduation rates for all of our areas, and really having much more emphasis on that because of just what you mentioned, James, because if we're worried about everyone working remotely, what does that mean for our end product? What does that mean for our students and the outcomes? And so with that, I think we've been real hypersensitive to what our employers are telling us, as far as we have a lot of students doing field work. We had a whole week of assessment work about 2 weeks ago with our faculty. And I think the other part of that is really looking at students who may have issues, of course, in learning online. So we have to think about any type of disabilities, any type of accommodations we need to make. So we've been also much more, we've kind of really geared that up as well. So I think there's some things we have to think about, that we do have responsibilities towards our course students and faculty, that there are some things they may need as far as further resources or guidance on how to really navigate an online environment. So I do think that the outcomes piece, I want to say we've already had mechanisms in place. So we're just really increasing the activity around assessment, and of course increasing, as I said, surveys. We've done a lot of surveys to be able to get the pulse of what our employers are saying to us, and especially the fieldwork part of it. It may be too soon, frankly, to say how have outcomes been impacted. I think that will come with time over this next year. But I do think it has been a combination of helping the faculty with how to really navigate well in the online environment, in addition to helping students who may be having some struggle, and or faculty as well.
And what about you, Dr. Zhang? So with going forward, and again, this request from staff, whether it's technologists working from home and faculty wanting to teach classes through their living room on their laptop, knowing though that the end result is you want to have 100% expectation of all students graduating with A's and B's, et cetera. How are you handling, and how are you discussing what the expectations are among staff and faculty?
Yeah, it is a very important and also very complex question. What we have learned is the high flex model has been really effective, and also can provide maybe a potential solution to accommodate both needs, right? Online and on-site. And at the beginning of the school year, we were concerned high flex may not work well. As it turned out, business school faculty members really enjoyed high flex modality, but other faculty in other disciplines or other schools and colleges didn't find so. So high flex classroom actually requires certain technology support. And I know a number of our classrooms are configured or reconfigured to accommodate high flex teaching. but the number is very limited. So for me, for business school especially, if we want to offer more sections delivered in a HyFlex format, we would need more technology support. Our media center has been really wonderful, but again, there's only so much capacity they can handle, and also how much investment would the university be willing to do, right, to configure more classrooms. When I attended some seminars organized by international organizations, I was just amazed at some universities, international universities in other countries, invest millions of dollars in the classrooms, right, to accommodate various formats of teaching. At least at Suffolk, I have not seen that yet, but there is some investment, and I would love to see more classrooms that can accommodate HyFlex teaching. And the other piece is, again, what's the right mix of online and on-ground education? And certainly there are merits and pros and cons of both. And in terms of student recruiting, for example, we have seen really high attendance rates for virtual events, especially international students were able to attend your information sessions, right? So that's something we would love to continue. And but technology support definitely plays a very important role, and other IT systems, I have to say, also are important in terms of supporting the education process. So at Suffolk, we've been implementing Workday and also Hilo Campus, which helps really create a lot of dashboards and data, as Dr. Sweeney mentioned. Data is really critical in making decisions. And those dashboards created by this IT system are just amazing. So it's important for people like us to have great data to access to, so that we can make informed decisions. So what's the right mix between online and on ground? That, I think that's a very strategic decision. And also, what's the right financial model of online education? I've heard that some people think it's actually more affordable or cheaper to offer courses online or degrees online. On the other hand, the opposite is it could be even more expensive to offer online programs. So we would need tools to help decision makers evaluate different models and different formats and see where the sweet spot is, right, for every institution. And I am worried about the current freshmen that experience their whole year in a virtual environment. I don't know about the retention rate yet, so we're anxiously waiting to see how many will come back to register in the fall. But I am very worried about their first year experience as a college student. They took everything online, attended every event online. I don't really know what they think. So that's my biggest concern for the coming year.
Well, with that's interesting too. Again, I can only imagine what we're going to face. I know, I think tentatively we're already seeing a drop in attendance for us. But let me open up the floor. I think we have about 10 minutes left, but let me open up the floor to the people who are attending in regards to any feedback from your experience that has to do with, what was expected and then actually what was reality, and or, for example, things that you attempted to do, but maybe the budget wasn't there, and so you had to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Or was there a complete paradigm shift in just the past year? Any comments from the attendees? Or questions for the panelists? Or questions just in general, just looking?
I have a question, James. I guess the question is for everyone, but I really would love to get the perspective of Stacy and Amy. If you were able to sit in a room with a CIO, right, and there are a number of CIOs here in the room now, and you were able to say to them, look, this is what I expect to go back to what it was normal, what it was before, and this is what I expect to just be changed forever. And this is what help I need. This is the support that I need, for the future. What would you say to them? Because I think CIOs need to be, obviously they're having conversations with their faculty, but what are your thoughts on that? And really, what has everyone else heard, and what are your plans for supporting faculty? But Stacy or Amy?
My quick response to that is really how to support the remote work. And when I look at what's happened at Bay Path, even it's sort of been a hit or miss sometimes. I've had situations where I'll suddenly hear a program chair has their own laptop they're working from, and then it can be all sorts of issues that pop up from that. So I think it really is being able to balance that idea of, if we're going to have more remote workers, of course we want to still have the quality, still have the outcomes. How can we make sure they have what they need remotely? Of course, that could become a budget issue, but then you have to be creative. And how do you handle that? How do you look at what's sitting in the office space and the classrooms versus what our faculty and staff may need from home, at home, in particular for remote learning, remote work and learning?
Yeah, I echo what Stacy just said. I hope there will be technology breakthrough that really allows virtual classroom or virtual campus to become true. I know there are several startups that are working on virtual classroom experience, where students could experience almost everything in a way similar to they would experience in the physical setting. And so wouldn't that be nice if we had the virtual reality or augmented reality that can help that become true? Of course, that may be a near future reality, but definitely technology support, right? And I as a new person, I found it really time consuming to collect information or connect dots. It's just so difficult to understand, to collect information, right? So in a virtual environment, it's difficult because you have to schedule a meeting, or call someone in order to find out where the information is, where the document is. But in a physical setting, you could just stop by someone's office, right, to ask for information. And so how can we speed up the information gathering process in a virtual environment? I think that's one of the biggest challenges I faced as a new person, trying to learn a new campus. But I don't know if there's any solution to that. But I think technology can definitely help accelerate or speed up the information collection process.
I have one more. This makes like a silly thing to mention. I think Amy's making me think about this. It's just being able to call people. Like I found myself in a situation where I didn't have people's phone numbers. It was so ridiculous. Like you have all their as far as their direct lines, and then some perhaps weren't hooked up as they should be, and so that was a loss. Like, oh my goodness, let me call so and so. I'm like, I don't have their phone number, and it just seemed like a silly thing. But it's like, wow. So I think something that's simple as far as the communication. We need to be thinking about that of course long term if we look at remote work.
Yeah, because it wasn't a custom that you just call someone without letting them know, right? So you would email them or text them to let them know, do you have time to talk, to chat, and then you call, right? And this is really a different culture here. I know in other countries, you could call anyone at any time, but here you have to be mindful. So it takes longer time to reach somebody, to talk to someone, to get that information.
Alex, Elmore, you had a question?
Yeah, Stacy's comment reminded me of something, and that is when I ran a flight training program when I was dean at Bridgewater State University. One of the things we did twice a year was tabletop exercises, where we took a crisis situation, brought all the people who potentially would be involved. Actually, the FBI and the Transportation Association sent people to sit in on those with us, and we would take our way through a crisis. And one of the things I recall was humorous that we found, but significant, is we found that we had the wrong phone number in our manual for the tower at the airport, which would have cost us 5 minutes or more in a crisis situation until we created it. So now that we're out of COVID, and we're past the panic stage, hopefully how dramatic this situation was would encourage universities to do some tabletop exercises on a regular basis and step deans and vice presidents and department chairs and various other folks through, okay, what do we do when we have a crisis situation? Because what you'd find out in that situation is that you didn't have people's cell phone numbers and you would put them in the document. So I think that's very significant, Stacy, and I'm glad you mentioned it. And I've seen how it works, and it just is a wonderfully reassuring situation when you do have that.
That being said, I think a lot of universities are implementing collaboration software that allows you to click a button and automatically see the other person on video or automatically call the other person through their computer. But not everyone has those technologies.
So with that said, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Is there, for any of the attendees, we appreciate your time. Is there any one last quick question you want to ask, throw out there, or any comments from your experience? No? All right, this generated, for me, it's generated much more other questions. I could have gone on for another hour, actually. It was really fantastic information. Dr. Zhang, Dr. Sweeney, thank you so much. And I thank you attendees for coming. Tom is going to, as a reminder, he's sending out the recording at some point, but he's also going to do a questionnaire. And we'd love to hear some feedback as well as any suggested topics that you'd like to, whether it's an extension of what we discussed today or something totally different. But on behalf of the Higher Ed Meetup Group, I want to say thank you very much for attending and providing your time. I'm James Stoffel.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you
Thank you so
for
much,
this
everyone.
great
Thanks,
discussion.
Stacey. Thanks, Amy.
That was wonderful. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Nice
Bye-bye.
to meet everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
And have a great weekend, everyone.
Oh, that's right. You too.